This is a few early reflections on a meeting that I facilitated for a network of organisational development practitioners in London in November in 2018. It was a gathering of about 25 people, and the perhaps slightly intriguing title I tried to put on this was Facilitating with Robots. But really what I was looking at was how the digital realm is already playing into our practice here in the present. And the future has kind of arrived. And I was interested in inquiring and opening a conversation about how the digital realm is positively or negatively posing us challenges in the way that we practice OD currently. And then we took a kind of theme park ride into the future, heading towards 50 years from now and towards what Ray Kurzweil in his book The Singularity talks about a tipping point where really we're more digitally connected than perhaps physically, where we plug in a way that is more than 51% of humanity connected, more than 51% in their being to digital technology. Now that might sound a bit unrealistic, it might sound a little bit like that classic science fiction futuring, but part of the context of this was things I'd read this year also, that science fiction has been remarkably prescient and accurate in predicting how we're going to be now. There are different views. One is that the future is coming slower than we predict, and others that it's coming faster. But already in our practice, we're very digitally connected, and our thinking practice is being influenced by that digital realm. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, beyond that, how would the practitioners in the room imagine themselves embracing and meeting the challenge, positive or negative, dark or light, of that digital realm in their practice? And how will OD change? They were some of the questions. And part of the kind of hidden thoughts that I've been having that I'm going to put into this reflection too was, I find a word which I know a lot of people will associate with something very different, which is occultism, relevant here, where occult means hidden from view. And that has always interested me about what is behind the scenes of the digital world that perhaps people in their daily lives, personal and working lives, don't actually see playing into them. Because that has big impact on facilitation of change, facilitation of organisation development. If the digital world now is becoming very relevant, but actually isn't there transparently and isn't there as consciously in our behaviours. I think that probably also has played in way before we might think our digital age began, perhaps with iPhones and computers. That's how the session began. It actually talked about the backdrop, the background to our behaviours now. And I asked the participants when they thought the digital age began. I know the digital age itself is a kind of buzzword, but the idea of when did we first associate the beginning of an age that we now call a digital age. And the room was very split on that. Some people went back to their first mobile phone, others identified the first computer. You can often see it on sale now as an antique for hundreds of thousands of pounds, that first Apple wooden keyboard. Others went back to the post-war, the huge machine, some people associating with IBM, that was made partly on the back of that, what we learned about coding and decoding in the war, the room-sized computer. And others went further back to the Babbage machine, and others went even further back to the first time we coded language in flashing lights and Morse code and that kind of stuff. I went even further back and posed the notion that whenever we began to think either or, one or zero, on or off, that when the world became binary, that's really when the digital age began. Someone pointed out that these fingers are actually called digits, and as soon as we count them, we're thinking in terms of number and digital. And I think I romantically went back even further, but there is some evidence in history and prehistory around. And you still find this in a lot of cultures where when people go into nature and live in nature and deal with the world that's not so easily resolvable as ones and zeros, the infinity of quality, as Robert Pirsig might have talked about. We talk about how people who were in nature, perhaps hunting for survival, when they chose to go in that direction with their spear or with their instincts, they weren't thinking, well, I'm not going in that direction. It wasn't an either or decision. It was more systemic and holistic, and people just had the whole of nature in their consciousness, and the choices they made were more instinctive and less this or that. That seems to have come with intellect. Now, some people, of course, in science will say that we're going to resolve the whole of the world either to a computer simulation, as Elon Musk talks about, but in serious science, they talk about the fact that we may be able to finally code the whole of the universe in terms of number, and find that the whole thing is digital in some way. But of course, others that talk about the quality of quality, and the notion of infinity talk about the fact that the digital world is a model, it's a simplification. And then it becomes a behavioural model that we can be trained into that doesn't quite capture the whole essence of the world around us. And so then we have a choice about the extent to which we conform to pixels, a pixelated world, a world simplified into a model that can defeat our senses in terms of the images we capture on our smartphones. By the time we get to billions of megapixels, well, perhaps not knowing the difference or being able to tell the difference lets us function, but perhaps something also eludes us. Now that surfaced in the room in a group of people who were, I don't think there were many people, if any, under 30, certainly people who were later in their careers as OD practitioners. It interested me that there was largely a distaste for the digital, a distaste for that coming into the room. Now that creates interesting challenges for people in that room, and I'm characterising that room in OD as a meeting that brings together a group of people and the OD practitioners facilitating some form of process. And people in that room may be much more digitally native. They may reach for their smartphones now to search through search engines into their world. They may be connecting in real time to their colleagues. And a lot of people in that room had a distaste for that and were still in the mode of turn your mobile phones off. Now, turning them off is about keeping them out of the room, and it's kind of making a positive choice to be in favour of the quality of quality, that digital distraction isn't something that is functional for conversation around change, for conversation around the design and development of organisations. Some people admitted they didn't have the skills, others felt an instinctive distaste for it. And as we look forward into a world where people start to literally plug into an interface with that digital world, where we may have digital medicine that can enhance our performance, where we may have digital implants that may enhance our memory, may give us total recall, will enable us to share minds with other people, may enable us and are beginning to enable us to enhance our physical mobility, to live longer, where we have the ability even now when we talk about products like Amazon Alexa and Echo and so on, where a device in the room can be either benevolently or not benevolently collecting information about us, collecting what we say, and then with the use of artificial intelligence, analysing what we say and feeding it back to us. We can have digital note-taking in the room, digital video recording. With the rise in 10 years of proper hologram technology, people can be present in the room who are not physically there, that are sitting at our table, and we can't physically tell the difference because they could be in another part of the world. And that may be driven by the environmental agenda as well. We've got the possibility of raising the dead, of having, through artificial intelligence and modelling, people in the room who are from history, who may no longer be working in the company, may have passed on. There's all sorts of possibilities, and this wasn't really a session about exploring the future in any detail, but I brought some of those scenarios into the room, and I wanted to bring what is sometimes hidden, which are the influences of this technology, both positively and negatively, into a consideration of our practice. Was I surprised that most people in the room, apart from a few, said, not me, I'll be gone by then. I don't really want to engage in this stuff. I don't trust this stuff. I don't trust the corporations that are delivering this stuff. I would find a device in the room collecting information about me. If it was mediated by a platform such as Google or Amazon, I wouldn't trust it. And there is no computer that can replace a human being. There is no artificial intelligence that can ever completely find ways of mimicking our nuanced, subtle, improvisational, instinctive, intuitive behaviour. That argument has played out before outside of the room of OD practitioners, but it was certainly there in the room. So as we went through this session, we looked at how practice might change. Would the facilitator themselves be making use of this technology? How would they deal with a robot compared to a human, or a robot from outside a room that was informing decision-making based on algorithms? At the moment in the world, we have artificial intelligence such as IBM Watson, which isn't proceeding actually at the pace that I think some people might have predicted, because there are problems with artificial intelligence and how it's evolving. But is that just a matter of time? What happens if we do have people in the room using augmented reality, where there are lie detectors in place, where we can find out information about people that informs decisions that may not be transparent to the person facilitating that meeting? One view is a bit like the acoustic busker, the person just on a guitar. Is it still possible and needed to go off-grid and have very sacred conversations that perhaps are better? Perhaps there are timeless principles of human conversation that go into that infinity place, that place of subtlety that, at least at the moment, and perhaps not for years, artificial intelligence is not going to be able to grasp. Um, we don't know the answers to that in the room, but we certainly imagined a number of things. One is that the facilitator in a room of much more digital technology will need to learn new skills, will need to look at their own behaviour in terms of how they're reacting to that digital technology. And we'll have to understand the new dynamics of a room that may be connected outside, as people even now tweet outside and get ideas tweeted back from the Twitter sphere. We've certainly had examples of how Twitter has helped inform decision making, of how you can have people on standby, not physically in a meeting, to come in virtually into a room for particular parts of the agenda. So the notion of absence and presence start to change as well. But when I come back finally to that word occult, hidden, that's where I think we really need to start thinking. Because there always were assumptions that were hidden from people. And OD practice often brought those assumptions into consciousness through various forms of practice. We became aware of the influences on what we were saying, what we were thinking, how we were feeling. And some of those influences were the way the organisation itself had, maybe not deliberately, maybe deliberately through its own PR, secretly shaped our attitudes to become resistors of change, to become champions of change. So that occult notion for me is where there is mechanical type behaviour, rules-based behaviour happening in the background that we're not aware of. And that already happened before we had computers in the room, as I'm saying. Patterns of thought that are put into us where we're not entirely free. And the reason we're not is because those influences are not clear or made conscious to us for benevolent or not benevolent reasons. So much of my own OD practice has been about that. It's been about getting a room in which people feel free to dialogue and be aware not just of what they're opinionating, but what is motivating those opinions. Becoming aware of your own will to say or do something. Now, the digital world offers us all the time targeted advertising based on algorithms. At the moment, a lot of the digital world sits on platforms that are not entirely independent, but actually have their own agendas to show us advertising, for example, and to map our behaviour, to target content back at us. And those tools are around at the moment. They're largely owned by corporations that have their own interests. Now, a lot of those organisations are not as transparent with us as they would like us to be transparent with them or with each other. Facebook themselves want us to be connected and open, but in recent scandals, Facebook has been unavailable for comment with its own challenges of is it influencing elections deliberately or accidentally through its own so-called neutral platform. And a lot of these platforms that have gone corporate, such as Facebook at Work and other collaboration platforms, sit on the platform of the platform that's behind the platform, and that is a platform for corporate interests. So going forward, that perhaps underlined why people have an intuitive distrust of digital technology, because they think there is something hidden behind it, and there may be something hidden behind that too. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory, that was certainly mentioned in the room. Ultimately, at that meeting, we had a negative view of technology, a resistance to change, and people in the room kind of owned up to that. And we weren't left with any resolutions, but we were aware that digital technology is here and it's changing fast.